You ever feel like you're just stuck on a treadmill, constantly chasing the next degree, the next certification, just to stay in the game? Well, a really compelling argument says we've all gone a little credential crazy, and honestly, it might be doing way more harm than good. So let's break down why. To really get our heads around this whole credential trap, we're going to look at it from 5 different angles. First, we'll dive into the obsession itself. Then, we'll talk about the broken promises, the systemic failures that got us into this mess, the very real human cost, and finally, what all that paper just can't measure.
All right, so what are we even talking about when we say credential obsession? Let's start by defining the actual problem here.
The term for this is hyper-credentialism. And let's be super clear here. We are not talking about a surgeon needing a medical degree. Of course they do. We're talking about the totally absurd trend of, say, a retail job asking for a master's degree, or an entry-level position demanding credentials that have absolutely nothing to do with the work you'll actually be doing.
And it's so important to get this nuance. This is not some big attack on all credentials, period. The problem is the obsession, this flawed belief that a piece of paper is the only way, the ultimate way to measure a person's potential.
So this obsession, it leads directly to this deep feeling of betrayal for a lot of people. It's really a story of a promise that's been broken, right? A huge gap between what education was supposed to give you and the reality that so many people are facing now. It's described perfectly as a dangling carrot. I mean, we've all heard that pitch from our parents or teachers, right? Just get this degree and the world is yours. It was basically sold to us as the golden ticket that would unlock everything. And then, bam, the reality check. On one side, you have the promise of success, of freedom. And on the other, the reality for so many, especially after the 2008 recession, low-paying jobs and this bitter feeling of being sold a false bill of goods. That degree was supposed to be a shortcut past all this, but for way too many, it just wasn't.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just about a tough job market. This was a systemic failure. The argument is that 2 major institutions, whether they meant to or not, basically worked together to fail an entire generation.
So you've got this failure on 2 fronts. On one hand, the education system kind of shifted its focus to just standardized testing, and in the process, practical, hands-on learning just died. And on the other hand, corporations completely cut on-the-job training and instead started demanding that new hires show up perfect and ready to go from day one. So think about it. When you take practical learning out of schools and you take on-the-job training out of companies, what are you left with? Well, the source has a pretty blunt term for it: a match made in hell. Okay, so we've got this big systemic problem, but what does it actually feel like for people? This is the very real and often totally overlooked human cost of our obsession with credentials. Our society often makes this really dangerous and unfair assumption. We see someone without a degree, and the unspoken judgment is, oh, they must be lazy, or they must not have any ambition. But is that really true? The answer is a hard no. The barriers are almost never a lack of drive, but a lack of resources. Real life gets in the way. Maybe it's a lack of money, maybe it's not having a car, or maybe it's needing to take care of a family member. These aren't character flaws, they're just real-world obstacles. And then you have the financial trap. The source even calls it a racket, where the goalposts are just constantly moving. You think you finally have the right credential, and then suddenly, nope, there are more classes you need, more prerequisites, and all of them cost more time and more money. It just keeps people on the hook. So yeah, the system is kind of broken. But just pointing out the problem isn't enough, right? We need to talk about a better way forward, a whole different way of thinking about what truly matters. This really gets to the heart of the solution. How do you measure creativity on a transcript? How do you measure dedication or passion or just simple decency, good character, the ability to show up and just get the work done? A piece of paper can't tell you any of that.
So what's the alternative? Well, maybe a return to the mentorship model. Imagine this. An apprentice learns by doing, through direct, hands-on experience. A mentor can actually assess real skills and a person's character. That kind of insight, passed through a network of people who know you, is infinitely more valuable than a GPA on a piece of paper.
Ultimately, it really boils down to this one distinction. The argument is that credentials have just become a stand-in for status. But what employers and what our society actually need is character. People who show up, who care about their work, and who just do a good job. And that leaves us with one final, really critical question. In our relentless chase for all these paper qualifications, are we wasting our greatest human potential? Are we just overlooking millions of people who have the drive, the character, and the ability? Everything except that formal degree. That, right there, is the core of the credential trap.